Over the past few weeks, Gen Z protesters have taken to the streets around the world, from France, Morocco to Madagascar, but nowhere has the anger burned hotter than in Asia. In just 5 years, young people have led about a dozen major protests, challenging corruption, inequality, and aging dynasties. And 4 of those movements didn't just make noise, they brought down governments. For months, I've been following the waves of Gen Z protests sweeping across Asia. My search for answers has taken me from Nepal to Mongolia, countries still grappling with the aftermath of youth unrest. In this documentary, I'll unpack the trend of youth turning memes into movements and hot tempers into hashtags. What's driving this generation's anger? Why are they taking matters into their own hands? And can their rage be turned into lasting change? Around the world, Gen Z protesters have been taking to the streets to express their anger over various social issues under a shared symbol, a pyro flag with a skull in a straw hat. The latest to rally behind it include youths in France, Morocco, and Madagascar. But few realize what is fast becoming a global icon began in Asia. Its roots as a protest symbol trace back to Indonesia. Imagine a young truck driver in Indonesia who spends about 12 hours on the road every day. His monthly pay, less than $240, barely covers the basics in Indonesia's rising cost of living. He's one of more than 2 million drivers hauling the country's economy on bare-bones pay. Then comes a new rule, zero odo, banning overloaded trucks. Sounds sensible, right? But for drivers, it's a nightmare. Companies will keep overloading to meet demand, and it's the drivers who get punished under this new policy. He can't quit, he needs the job, so he protests in his own quiet way. Before the country's Independence Day, he hangs a pyro flag right next to the red and white of Indonesia. It costs $1, but it says everything. I'm working, but I'm not free. Across Indonesia, more people are raising the flag to protest a growing list of issues. Why this symbol? It's the straw hat pyro flag from the 30-year-old anime One Piece. In the story, it's the banner of Luffy's crew of misfits, rebels who fight corrupt rulers and oppressive systems in search of freedom and justice. For protesters, it mirrors their own story. Outsiders challenging entrenched elites with creativity, humor, and hope, turning pop culture into a universal language of resistance.
In Indonesia, Gen Z is the first generations that actually never experienced authoritarian regime. And when they look at the situation these days and become unhappy with social and economic situation, they feel the sort of injustice by looking at how the political elites and economic elites sort of exploit, the country and leaving millions of Gen Z kids full of disillusions and unhappiness. And they found that the reference to the anime One Piece as a sort of a precise example of the world that they are facing in. So they were very much inspired by what they learned from the anime, and it became a symbol of resistance, a symbol of defiance and a fight for justice.
In September 2025, in the Philippines, the flag became part of another movement. After devastating floods, citizens discovered that billions meant for flood control projects had been siphoned off. A case of climate corruption, where funds meant to stop floods ended up lining pockets instead. Gen Z's been Gen Z's. They went beyond the one-piece flag, turning protests into performance. One even showed up dressed as a horror movie ghost to mock what they called ghost projects, government works that existed only on paper. But what really riled spirits was the hashtag Trillion Peso March, sparked by reports that billions meant for flood control projects had vanished through fake contracts and kickbacks. It went viral fast. Vloggers ended their clips shouting, "We're drowning while they steal," a line that hit hard in a country where poor communities are already battling rising floods and rising prices, just trying to stay afloat.
Billions allocated for flood control are stolen, while millions drown in the Philippines. But this is not just another corruption scandal.
Bad geography plus bad governance is really what gets into the anger of the Filipinos. As you see more and more high intensity, high velocity typhoons, which brings a lot of flooding, and then people hear that the money which was supposed to be used for flood control, there are ghost projects or substandard projects, and politicians line up their pockets. And this is just plain daylight robbery. Climate change, bad governance, suffering people. This is the kind of problem that you should expect.
Nepal was another country that hoisted the colors of the one-piece pyro flag. The country experienced its biggest political crisis in years when Gen Z-led protesters set government buildings ablaze and clashed with police in Kathmandu. The immediate trigger was a government ban on social media platforms. But deep anger stemmed from corruption, unemployment, and elite privilege. I was in Nepal recently. I learned firsthand how the uprising captured Gen Z's mix of digital mobilization and real-world fury.
It's very clear. I think the agenda were very clear since day one. Corruption. It's very visible in our country.
For every generation, like, we have encountered corruption in this country from all sides of institutions. Like, if you want to register a company, if you want to get a marriage certificate, the institution failure is so bad that every institution, they fail to do basic work.
Either you have to argue, you have to fight, or you have to use your power, or you have to bribe.
In Nepal, what started as a digital storm became a street revolution. It all began with a quiet act of defiance by a truck driver in faraway Indonesia that went viral across Asia. It showed how Gen Z can turn simple symbols into powerful rallying cries, fast, fluid, and impossible to contain. But did this protest really change anything? In Indonesia, the government didn't scrap the zero-auto truck policy, but the backlash forced it to pause, review enforcement, and start listening to drivers. In the Philippines, the trillion-dollar march made headlines and drew promises of transparency, but real reform and prosecutions remain out of sight. And in Nepal, the anger ran deepest. The prime minister and top officials were forced to resign, exposing just how far public trust had collapsed. Across Asia, the protests may look different, but they're bound by a shared frustration. Gen Zs feel betrayed by corruption, inequality, and a system that's shut them out. I'm in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia's capital. In May 2025, the city was rocked by mass protests, with thousands of students gathering in front of a government building. The last time Mongolia saw unrest of this scale was in 2022, when a major corruption scandal broke. State-owned coal was being illegally exported, reportedly to China, costing the country billions. Back then, protesters rallied under the hashtag coal thieves. This time in 2025, protesters were targeting their prime minister, who many accused of breaking an important promise. This is Subatar Square. This was where the Mongolian Gen Zs in May 2025 gathered for 21 days peacefully, rallying behind a hashtag, "It's easy to resign." The building over there, that's the parliament of Mongolia, really became a symbol of their frustration because the prime minister had vowed to fight corruption, but for 5 years made little progress, often brushing it off by saying it's not easy. So when these images online showed his own family surrounded by lavish gifts, this hashtag, "It's easy to resign," a brilliant twist on his own words, became a rallying cry for a younger generation of Mongolians demanding more accountability and transparency. The viral luxury posts quickly turned into memes with the hashtag Nepo kids, symbols of a ruling elite living large, while most Mongolians struggle with rising prices and stagnant wages. The images reignited anger among the Gen Z over corruption, nepotism, and widening inequality in Mongolia's resource-rich economy. For many, they mined out a deeper truth. National wealth was being hoarded by political families. Were you surprised 15 of you guys in a pub came out with a hashtag and you got rid of the prime minister?
Yes, it was so surprising. At the beginning, our expectation was, okay, he resign or not. It doesn't matter. Just not being quiet about this and standing out against this injustice is the thing. That was our goal. And giving people this meaning that you shouldn't actually be quiet about immoral things, and you shouldn't be quiet about corruption. We shouldn't be quiet about this dictatorship. That was actually the point.
This is many of the Agir districts on the outskirts of Ulaanbaatar. Agir is the traditional Mongolian home that's essentially a rounded tent. It has no running water and no indoor heating. And Mongolia's winter is frigid. Temperature can drop to minus 30. So survival in Agir means burning coal day and night. For Gen Zs who grew up out here, they will witness that struggle firsthand while scrolling through social media and seeing the privileges of the elites. That sharp contrast is really what's driving this deep sense of despair. And that's also what's leading many young Mongolians to say, enough is enough. The same outrage spread to Nepal, where hashtag Nepo kids also caught fire after a strikingly similar scandal. The spark? A viral story about a politician's daughter's lavish wedding that blocked city traffic and filled social media feeds with anger. From there, memes mocking politicians' children flashing designer bags and luxury cars, while ordinary Nepalis struggled, snowballed into street protests that reshaped the government.
There's also the story about contestations about the celebrity status as to, who is allowed to be the national celebrity and who is not, right? So people who felt this outrage were also urban young people who have some aspirations about glamour and the kind of the fake capitalistic potentials of glamour that, you can go from rags to riches. So I think it might be the power of technology, the evils of capitalism, and globalization, everything coming together at this moment of political instability, which has already been ringing true for quite some time.
In the Philippines, trolls named and shamed children of elites. One particular flashpoint, the 40 cars post.
Our favorite is the Rolls.
Rolls Royce.
Yes, the Rolls Royce.
Businesswoman Sarah Disgaya bragged about buying a Rolls Royce just for a free umbrella.
Hindi ko pinagagamit yung payong na to.
Hindi pwedeng gamitin.
Oo, kasi mahal yung payong.
Ang balita ko, dun sa interview mo, binili mo yung isang Rolls Royce dahil nagandahan ka sa payong. Tama ba?
Sir, yes po.
A crazy rich Asians moment that sent Gen Z Filipinos over the edge.
There's also a lot of associated issues here, which is the issue of unemployment and underemployment by the young people, the ostentatious display of wealth and lifestyle by the children and by the corrupt politicians. You see them dining in Michelin star restaurants and flaunting in their Instagram their handbags and their vacations in Paris or LA. And these are the sons and daughters of these corrupt contractors and politicians. And the conclusion is that these people are really greedy. They are tone deaf. This ostentatious display of wealth is just too much to bear for the population.
In Mongolia, a no-confidence vote brought down the government. In Nepal, the prime minister resigned. And in the Philippines, both houses of Congress saw a power shakeup. Yet beneath these political changes, the anger driving #NepoKids remains unresolved. Across the region, a growing youth bulge should be an economic advantage. But when jobs and opportunities don't follow, it often breeds disillusionment and unrest.
There are no jobs for these young people, right? And if there are jobs, they are underemployed. And then plus all these problems of corruption, then you have all these issues bottled up, right? Instead of politicians thinking of how to help the young people get training or get employment, get good paying jobs, you have problems of runaway inflation, problems of uncertainty in the economy, problems of job security, and then AI taking their jobs. Companies are not hiring. So if you put all of these things together, of course, it all boils down to a lot of anger and frustration for the young people.
With 4 Asian governments toppled by Gen Z uprisings, many are now calling it an emerging Asian spring. In less than 5 years, 4 Asian governments have fallen to protests led or driven by Gen Z. What's striking is that these weren't dictatorships. They were democracies, the very systems meant to change power through the ballot box, not the barricades. It's a contradiction that cuts deep. Governments chosen by the people are now being brought down by those who elected them. It says a lot about the strength or weakness of these institutions. One theory keeps coming up. Instability happens when people mobilize faster than institutions can adapt. Put simply, when elections lose credibility or courts and parliaments stop being trusted, the street becomes the only place left for change.
In most of the other countries, also there's public consensus about what is driving protests. people publicly agree that most of the politicians are engaged in corruption and it is important to get them out. And I think this is also one of the reasons is because you see the middle class coming together and saying that, look here, we try to work hard and earn money, whereas politicians earn money through corruption, and that is not something that we like to tolerate. What I would also see a similarity is people are frustrated with many governments about limited ability for upward social mobility.
For many of these countries, entrenched political dynasties and elites have ruled for decades, and Gen Z believes they've lost touch with everyday reality. In 2022, Sri Lanka was hit by its worst economic crisis in memory. Soaring inflation, fuel shortages, power cuts, and public anger exploded. The protesters called for President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and his powerful family network to resign over corruption, mismanagement, and authoritarian rule. They used the hashtag #GoHomeGota to amplify their message. As pressure mounted, President Gotabaya fled the country and resigned in July 2022. The movement exposed deep systemic problems: cronyism, debt dependency, and over-concentration of power in one family.
In the case of Sri Lanka, when Sri Lankans chased away President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and that entire family, there was a consensus in the public that it was the right thing. Context is there was an economic crisis. Sri Lanka's public debt became unsustainable, and therefore Sri Lanka had to declare a sovereign default. This is the first time that Sri Lanka had to declare a sovereign default, then which was followed by what we call debt restructuring. Sri Lanka's inflation has now come down. It was 70% around the time of crisis and subsequently. Now Sri Lanka's inflation is around 1%. In fact, for about 6 months, we had deflation. And Sri Lanka's debt is right now is in the path of becoming sustainable because we are restructured our debt. In terms of economically, I think the fundamental fact is that Sri Lanka has to keep their revenues up. That means Sri Lankans has to have a good tax system. Sri Lankans have to have good institutions that can collect taxes so there are very limited tax evasion.
Even after the change in leadership, many Sri Lankans remain cautious. The protests were met with crackdowns, freedoms were tested, and the reforms they fought for are still unfinished. So after the firestorms of 2022, how far has Sri Lanka really come out of default and debt? And could more upheaval be on the horizon?
Certainly the current government has more of a mandate, and currently that mandate appears to hold. The people appear to be patient with the government, giving them time in terms of the economic recovery and so on. However, that being said, I want to emphasize that the current government's legitimacy is largely hinged on an anti-corruption narrative. And beyond this anti-corruption narrative, there's really an ideological narrative is missing. And alongside this, we have a very shrinking state patronage model. It could be the case that down the road, if there's an external shock or if there's some form of security crisis, that the government may once again face a challenge of large-scale mass uprising. The main thing here to emphasize is the importance of institutions.
This wasn't unique to Sri Lanka. In Bangladesh, frustration over similar long-standing issues exploded in 2024 when a student-led uprising toppled longtime leader Sheikh Hasina. It began with anger over public sector job quotas, but quickly grew into a mass revolt against corruption, unemployment, and dynastic rule. The movement's defiant hashtag I am Razakar flipped a government slur, turning the word traitor into a badge of pride. From Bangladesh to Nepal, a striking theme in Asia's new protest wave is generational betrayal. Today's rulers were once the revolutionaries of the 1990s.
So corruption mixed with lawlessness creates, very pathetic environment for the people who have, some commitment for the country. So that has influenced, given a very bitter taste to the youngsters, because they think that they don't have, future abroad, and they think that the environment to work in their own country is so bleak. So it does not give exit to their sense of profession or business in this country. So that is the major issue, I think, that has created an environment of hopelessness.
In Nepal, political elders who once led youth uprisings are now seen as part of the establishment, accused of practicing the very corruption they once fought. In Mongolia, Prime Minister Oyur Dane, who styled himself as a reformer, was viewed by protesters as out of touch with youth's demands for transparency and accountability. And much like Sri Lanka's hashtag Go Home Gota movement, the hashtag It's Easy to Resign became an effective rallying cry for Gen Zs in the country. Similar frustrations surfaced in Timor-Leste, Thailand, and South Korea. While not entirely Gen Z-led, young protesters there voiced a familiar divide, a widening gap between aging elites and a generation that feels unheard and neglected.
We have these old political guards, really more centralized political leaderships who have concentrated power for a long period of time. In Sri Lanka's case, the political establishment spans over decades, and I'm aware that this is also the case with Nepal and Bangladesh. So you have these symptoms of these very old political elites, centralized systems of governance, often allegations of large-scale corruption against these leadership. And then we see these largely horizontal movements led by youth, often organized on social media, and not usually affiliated to political parties in the Sri Lankan case. We see them then leading this anti-establishment protest against this old guard. One similar structural undercurrent is that we see that there is a rising trend of middle class, especially middle class aspirations, of a certain development dream, of a certain consumerist-driven lifestyle. And often the current economic systems are unable to help the people achieve these middle class aspirations.
Across Bangladesh, Nepal, and beyond, governments have tried censorship and crackdowns to quell the recent unrest. But those tactics don't work anymore. This is a generation that's educated, tech-savvy, and spends a lot of time online. Offline, they're stuck in stagnant economies where inequality is very real. Unlike the millennials of the Arab Spring, Asia's Gen Zs aren't driven by ideology. They're leaderless and tired of waiting for change. They've already done what their parents couldn't, bring down governments. But experts warn unless institutions catch up, this new Asian Spring could keep looping between online outrage and political collapse.
The basic problem now with the Gen Z group is they don't have a consolidated one unified leader. They don't have any disciplinary process, and they don't know who can represent their voices to the government that has been created. So there are different groups and different people are speaking differently, even though broadly we can understand what they mean. But then when there are particular issues, they differ so much with each other.
I don't see much in terms of, containing inequality or containing the power of money. Gen Zs have been extremely efficient in expressing their discontent, and these technological platforms and have really facilitated that. But that's only the beginning of the journey.
In September 2025, more than 15,000 young Nepalis flooded the streets of Kathmandu. The protests turned violent, leaving 70 dead and ultimately brought down the government. In a first for South Asia, protesters turned to Discord, a gaming and chat platform to coordinate rallies, share updates, and even vote online for a new prime minister, choosing former Chief Justice Sushila Karki for her clean record.
I don't think we could call the current prime minister, elected prime minister in a conventional sense. And my hope is that even the Gen Zs would be sensible enough to understand that virtuality is one mode of expression, but beyond that, the political parties just don't disappear, vanish into thin air, right? There's need for deliberative democracy or politics as well.
It's not just the choice of leader. Protest organizers like law students and artists are now designing the new government's policy blueprints on inheritance taxes, wealth redistribution, and inequality. Protesters describe the old elite as captured by old men. Observers say Nepal's politics is now being remade in Gen Z's digital image. In the Philippines, outrage took a similar digital path. Filipinos turned to Reddit, a space usually dominated by gaming, memes, and pop culture. In August 2025, an anonymous user launched r/lifestylecheckph, a spin on the government's own wealth audit policy. Originally conceived as an anti-corruption tool by authorities to compare officials' declared income with their visible wealth. This time, it wasn't officials doing the checking, it was Gen Z. They called out excess online, posting shots of politicians' kids flaunting designer bags, cars, and vacations, tagged #Nepo baby and #Nepo kids. Within a week, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. announced new official lifestyle audits on public officials, echoing the language of the movement he was trying to contain. The protests peaked on September 21st, the anniversary of martial law in 1972, when thousands turned up to demand accountability and transparency. Proof that Gen Z's digital dashboards can drive real-world dissent.
When the courts are not working, when the ombudsman and the system of checks and balances and the media is not able to solve or help on these issues, then you really need the social media community. I would see them on balance as a positive force to keep all these corrupt politicians in check. I think without the pressure from the social media and from the young people, these things probably will just be dusted off under the rug, right? So it's a welcome thing. Now, are there downside effects? Yes, you've seen that in the case of fake news in Indonesia that led to the burning of some minister's house because of some fake news. That's bad. That should be mitigated. Social media platforms such as Facebook, Meta, TikTok should be held to account for allowing their platforms to be used for these kinds of individuals, right? But by and large, I think social media activism should be welcome, especially in situations where institutions are weak or corrupt.
In Timor-Leste, viral social media posts drove students to protest the parliament's approved $4 million purchase of vehicles for legislators. It was another case of political elders who once led youth uprisings in the 1990s and are now part of the establishment, accused of corruption. The protests ended with the MP's car purchase cancelled and the government agreeing to abolish lifetime pensions for former MPs. In neighboring Indonesia, the one-piece pirate flag that started it all took on new life, now joined by fresh hashtags and new meaning. One of the biggest issues gripping Gen Zs in Indonesia is unemployment. The unemployment rate among those aged 15 to 24 is over 13%. By August, protests erupted nationwide, reigniting anger that has simmered since previous demonstrations between 2019 and 2023 over corruption and inequality.
If you look at the fact that Indonesia is now having a demographic bonus, which means that there are more than 50% of the population are in productive ages, it should be a momentum for Indonesia to become, more prosperous because we have more people able to work. But unfortunately, the past 5-10 years, government policy has not really delivered what the government has promised, and a lot of young populations could not find permanent jobs or could not find well-paid jobs. So they feel angry and they feel that they've been betrayed by the government.
It all started when lawmakers quietly gave themselves a 50 million rupiah housing allowance, almost 10 times what a fresh graduate makes. Online, people were furious. The hashtag Indonesia Galap or Dark Indonesia started trending, a way of saying the country's been blinded by greed and corruption. Pretty soon, the anger spread. People weren't just talking about money anymore. They were demanding better education, police reform, government accountability, fair pay, and decent jobs. The same things Gen Zs across Asia have been fighting for.
What they really care about is how deep the inequality and the gap between this young population with the political elites. There seems to be a democratic decline that threatens the freedom and the opportunity for a younger population to engage in politics. And it is also get worse with nepotistic politics as shown in President Joko Widodo's decisions to support his son to become vice president, and this is followed by many other politicians in the regional level in many provinces and many districts. So the kids, the young generations were very disappointed with this condition, and Indonesia Gelap is sort of a symbol of their feeling about the future of Indonesia, that Indonesian future is bleak, is gloomy, and they have to do something in order to turn the condition back.
The movement took a tragic turn when Afan Kurniawan, a 21-year-old delivery rider, was killed when a police vehicle rammed into protesters in Jakarta. His death became a rallying point, proof that ordinary workers were paying the price for elite privilege and state power. It also sparked a wave of regional solidarity through the hashtag Siblings, or Southeast Asian siblings, as youth across Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and the Philippines sent food orders to Indonesian drivers and riders in support.
Afan Kurniawan is an example of a young man who represent his Gen Z kids that had not really a good life. He had to work as a motorcycle driver, which is sort of the bare minimum to make a living in Jakarta. And with the accident that happened with Afan Kurniawan, we can see how terrible the conditions of the workers in Indonesia, especially those who work in the informal sectors. And The response that comes from overseas, from the Philippines, from Malaysia, from Thailand, is really, really heartening. And I think this indicates sort of a solidarity among Gen Z population in the regions. We should maintain, because they are the one who are going to handle the countries in the future, right? And it should be the hope for each of the country to maintain.
The struggle of the Grab driver is the struggle of the young people. They can relate to that. A lot of the Grab drivers, not just Grab, but Gojek and everything, the platform economy, is a struggle of the young people because they could not get good paying jobs in the real economy. So they get stuck in this platform economy, right? So people can identify with that. It becomes their identity, it becomes their tribe, right? And it resonates. And so, again, this is not just the struggle of one country or the young people, but also an identity.
In the aftermath, Indonesian officials pledged greater transparency over lawmakers' perks and spending, but the long-term impact is still unclear. What began as anger over perks and pay had become something bigger, a digital movement for justice, solidarity, and dignity that united a generation across Southeast Asia, just like the one-piece pirate flag motif that's now made its way across the globe. Across Asia, Gen Z's anger comes from a shared feeling that no matter how educated or tech-savvy they are, opportunity keeps slipping away. But instead of tuning out, they've turned the digital world into their rally ground, using memes, hashtags, and dashboards to demand change. And now it's gone beyond borders. The issues they're fighting for, fairness, jobs, accountability, are universal. From Kathmandu to Jakarta, the message is the same. This generation isn't waiting for change. They're making it.